One evening many years ago, I was strolling with a friend on the terrace of the theatre of San Pedro de Alcântara. This was between the second and third act of the play The Sentence, or Trial by Jury. Only the title sticks in memory, but it was this very title that brought us to speak of the institution, and of an incident that I've never fully forgotten. I was always opposed to jury duty, my friend said. Not to the institution itself, it's a liberal idea, but because it's repugnant to me to condemn someone, and also because of that precept of the gospel, judge not lest ye be judged. Nevertheless, I've served twice. The court was then in the old Aljube prison at the end of Orive Street, right there at the Hill of the Conception. My conscience was so sensitive that besides 2 cases I voted to acquit every defendant. The crimes just never seemed proven to me. 1 or 2 of them were presented horribly. The first of those I did vote to condemn was a clean-cut young man, accused of having stolen a certain amount, not large, but rather small, forging a document. He didn't deny it, nor could he, but he did contest being held responsible for instigating or inspiring the crime. Someone else, whose name he didn't divulge, gave him the idea to settle some personal financial emergency, and yet God, from whom no heart is hidden, would punish the real criminal as he deserved. He said this, unemphatically, sad, muttering, dead-eyed. And he was so pale it was heartbreaking. The state's prosecutor found in his very coloring a confession of the crime, and on the other side the defense showed that his dejection and pallor only demonstrated the anguish of someone who was wrongfully accused. Rarely have I witnessed a debate so brilliant. The prosecutor's case was brief but strong, indignant, with a tone which seemed almost hateful. The defense attorney, his talent as a lawyer aside, happened to be making his debut in court that day. Relatives, colleagues, and friends waited for the young man's opening statement, and it was well worth the wait. His statement was awe-inspiring, and it would have saved the accused if he could have been, but the crime was obvious on its face. The lawyer died 2 years later, in 1865. Who can tell what was lost by his death? Believe me, when I see a young man with talent die, I feel so much more than when an older man dies. But let's get back to what I was telling you. The rebuttal of the prosecutor followed, and then the counter-argument made by the defense. The judge made his summation of the arguments, and once the questions to the jury were read, they were handed to the foreman, which was me. I won't go into all that happened in the jury room. Besides being sworn to secrecy, what happened in there doesn't figure into the matter much. I admit it's better to remain silent, so I'll tell this quickly. The third act's not going to wait for us. One of the jurors on the panel, heavy-set and red-haired, seemed convinced more than anyone of the crime and the guilt of the accused. They all deliberated on the case. The charges reread, the responses given, 11 against 1. The red-haired juror alone was intractable. When it was all over, the final votes assured a guilty verdict, and he was satisfied. He said it would have been an act of weakness, or something worse if we had absolved the accused. One of the jurors, who certainly voted to acquit, offered some words in defense of the young man, the redhead, by the name Lopez, was annoyed and replied, "How, sir, but the guilt of the accused goes way beyond a reasonable doubt." "Now, let's not argue," I said, and everyone agreed with me. "I'm not arguing. I'm defending my vote," Lopez went on. "This crime is more than proven. The accused denies his guilt because every defendant denies guilt. The fact is he committed forgery, and what a hell of a forgery. All of that because of a little hardship for 200 milrays. Look, if you go dirty, get rich. You want to go filthy? Go filthy, get filthy. Go filthy, get filthy." I have to admit my jaw dropped. Not that I understood the phrase. On the contrary, I neither understood it nor found it appropriate. And that's why my jaw dropped open. Finally, I walked over and knocked on the door. They opened it. I approached the bench, delivered the jury's verdict, and the defendant was declared guilty. His lawyer appealed. Whether the sentence was ever carried out or the appeal accepted, I don't know. I lost track of the whole thing. When I left the court, I got to thinking about Lopez's phrase, and I seemed to understand it. Go filthy, get filthy, was as if it were saying that the guilty man was worse than a thief. A two-bit thief. A thief over nothing. I came to this realization on the corner of St. Peter Street just before I came to Orives. I even decided to take a detour to see if I could find Lopez to shake his hand, but there was no trace of him. Well, the following day, reading all our names in the newspapers, I came across his full name. It wasn't worth the trouble to find him, nor did I worry about it. These are the pages of the lives we lead, as my little boy said, making up verses, waxing on about my turning the pages. Forgotten just as soon as we read. It rhymed, just like that. But I don't remember the lines exactly. Well, many years later, that same little boy lectured me, in prose this time, that I shouldn't turn down a jury that I'd just been called up for. I told him I wasn't going to report and cited to him the verse of the gospel. He insisted it was a citizen's duty and obligation. No one who respected himself would deny his country, so I went. And I served on a series of 3 trials. One of these concerned an employee at the Equitable Labor Bank. The teller was accused of embezzling funds. I'd heard of the case, which the papers covered, without much detail. I actually read very little in the crime section. But the defendant appeared, and he went to sit down in the notorious gallery of the accused. He was a thin man, with red hair. I looked him up and down, and I shuddered. I seemed to be looking at my colleague from that verdict years before. I was unable to recognize him right away because he was now thin. But he had the same colored hair and beard, same demeanor, and finally the same voice and the same name, Lopez. State your name, the judge said. Antonio do Carmo Ribeiro Lopez. Well, the first 3 names didn't suggest anything that I remembered, but the 4th was the same. And other indications seemed to confirm what I vaguely remembered. It didn't take me long to recognize the same person from that day long ago. Now, I can admit to you now, in all honesty, the circumstances distracted me from following the questioning very closely, and many things escaped me. But when I did pull myself together enough to really listen, it was almost over. Lopez firmly denied everything he was asked, or answered in a way that complicated the case. His eyes moved around the room with no fear or anxiety, maybe even to the point of laughing out of one side of his mouth. Well, then followed the charges being read. It was forgery and embezzlement in the amount of 110 million reais. I'm not going to tell you how the crime was discovered or the criminal. I can hear the orchestra tuning. What I will say with certainty, the presentation of the evidence impressed me very much. The investigation, the teller's attempted flight, along with a series of aggravating circumstances, and finally the testimony of the witnesses. I listened to the readings and the speeches and kept my eyes on Lopez. He was listening too, but with his head held high, staring at the clerk, the presiding judge, the ceiling, and the people who were going to judge him, myself among them. When my turn came, he didn't recognize me. He stared at me for some time and smiled, but in the exact same way he did the others. The man's every gesture seemed to confirm both the cases of the prosecution and defense, just as the opposite kind of gestures had served, years before, with the other accused. The prosecutor felt they revealed his contempt. The counsel for the defense showed that only innocence and certainty of acquittal could exhibit such peace of mind. While the 2 attorneys were speaking, I began to think how fateful it was. His being there in the same seat as the other one, this man who voted to condemn him. And naturally I recalled the verse from the gospel, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." I confess to you I got a chill more than once. It's not even that I could commit an act of embezzlement, but I could, in a fit of anger, kill someone, or be falsely accused. That man there judged the other one, and now he himself was being judged. Just underneath the Bible verse, I suddenly remembered the words of this very man Lopes, "Go filthy, get filthy." I never imagined how jarring that memory could be. It brought to mind everything I just told you, the deliberations that I heard in the jury room up to those words, "Go filthy, get filthy." And I saw this was no two-bit thief. No thief over nothing but of huge dividends. And the words suited perfectly to the action. Go filthy, get filthy, which is to say, a man shouldn't undertake such a grotesque act without a grotesque return. No one should dirty their hand for just a few bucks. You want to get filthy rich. These were the ideas and phrases running through my mind, rolling around in my head, paying no attention to the judge's summation and his instructions to the jury. When he finished reading the charges, we retired to the jury room. I can tell you now, between you and me, that I voted guilty. The theft of $110 million seemed so certain. There was, among other documents, a letter written by Lopes that made the crime evident, but it seems not all of them read it with the same eyes I did. 2 other jurors voted with me. 9 denied any criminal act on the part of Lopes. The not guilty verdict was brought in and read, and the accused walked free onto the street. The size of the majority in the vote was such that I came to doubt. I was right. Maybe so. I still feel pangs of conscience to this day. Fortunately, if Lopes didn't really commit the crime, at least he wasn't punished because of my vote. And this consideration consoles me. But my conscience still comes back. The best policy is not to judge anyone, so that you don't come to be judged. Go filthy, get filthy. Go filthy, get fucked. Filth is in the eye of the beholder. Best not to judge anyone. The music stopped. We better get back to our seats. Go Filthy, Get Filthy by Machado de Assis, first published in 1906, translated for audio performance by Todd Conner, copyright 2020, and also a few bars of rhythm track from Pixinguinha's Carinhoso, composed in about 1916. If you like this work and would like to support The Karaoke, please consider making a purchase at the Karaoke Podcast store. A direct link is available on the website at www.thekaraoke.com. Or if you'd like to make a donation, click on the website's link for PayPal. Commercial or private sponsorship of future episodes can include the recording of a story live at your own location. See the website for details. In the meantime, as always, listen, like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.